Awesome moderator by the name of Lionel. That's not going to happen. It was me. I was given this opportunity about half hour before the conference. So anyways, let's get started. Our first presentation, I'm Norman Pavalchik. I'm from Wisconsin Department of Transportation. I'm a Bureau of Technical Services chief. I've got obviously access management, utility coordination, and portions of real estate acquisition, right-of-way acquisition. So let's get started with our presentations this afternoon. First one is how to implement an access management policy, and that's going to be presented by Randy Hoskins. This presentation is going to discuss ways that this presenter found that to try and make access policy, how to implement it in the community, how to make it a little bit easier, things that you should be aware of, things you should avoid just to make that process just a little bit easier. And Randy is from the city of Lincoln, Nebraska. Randy is the assistant city engineer for the city of Lincoln. He's got over 30 years of experience working in the transportation and state and local governments. And I want to make sure that he talks a little bit about his bowling alley access management experience, because if you're from Wisconsin, bowling is a big thing here, and it's kind of like our state sport. So you got to make sure you hit on that. So with that, let's welcome Randy.
Yeah, my first experience with access management was actually going with a bowling alley owner to the Colorado Department of Transportation and trying to get him a fourth access onto a state highway. Fortunately, I've learned a little bit since then, and I guess I'm proof that you can teach tricks. As I said earlier, through the course of my career, I have had the opportunity to implement three different access management policies in three different cities, and it's been interesting because the first one that I did, it went really well. It was for a smaller city. The second one was for a much larger city, and it was pretty much dead on arrival. And then I got to Lincoln, and that was my third opportunity to put together an access management plan. It was a pretty involved process, actually. We did our first draft of this in June of 2008, and then the wheels kind of fell off of it. And so it has been in place, though, now for about 6.5 years, and it's working really well. So I think the process ultimately led to something very good. Now, when I came to Lincoln, the access management there was pretty much a joke. I'm not even sure you could really call it access management. You see some of the standards here on the screen that we were working with at that time. That last one down there, turning lanes may be required. No, they were never required. So, it was that was kind of the situation that I stepped into, and at the time that this was put into place, Lincoln had a population of less than 200,000. And so by the time that we got the new one put in place, Lincoln was about 250,000. Now, Lincoln has always kind of maintained a small town mentality despite the fact that we're growing. But there was definitely a need for something that would take care of the traffic through town. One of the difficult issues we've got, again, with that small town mentality is a lot of our streets, our arterial streets, are just two-lane streets, two plus ones, most of them. And so it became very important to get access management in order to be able to move traffic along the streets. Now, one of the things that I started even before this policy was we had more or less an unwritten policy in place. What we'd done was, we looked at some of the better access management policies around the country, and so we started putting in some of these things, and it was a bit of a bluffing game with the developers when they'd come in. We'd tell them, okay, here's the standards, here's what you have to do, this is what we want, and they would either take it or not. And one of the things that was interesting was we found that developers who are a bit more savvy meaning those that came in from out of town, they had no problems with what we were proposing because they'd seen access management policies like this before. But it was the local developers where we had the real problems because they, the only way for their gas station to work was to be on the corner with 2 or 3 accesses off each street. Well, we all know how that works out. The problem we had with this unwritten policy, though, was if somebody called our bluff. And that was when we didn't really have anything to back us up. They would take us to city council and they would complain, and city council would ultimately overturn us and they'd get their multiple accesses on multiple streets. So that's kind of where we were at when we started the policy. So I wrote this new policy. It was gonna save the world. It was gonna make everything right, but it didn't quite work out that way. It was a major change from what we had before, and as we tried to implement it, we started running into some issues, and basically the reality of it was it was shot down in flames pretty quickly. Now, one of the problems that we had with this was the developers had, I don't want to say bought the city council, but they put their money in towards their elections, and so they have a real close ear with the city council members, and that made it very tough for us. But before we'd even gone very far on this, we sent this out and had it reviewed by engineers in the community. We had both traffic engineers as well as development engineers, and had them look at it, and they'd given us some feedback on it and given us some ideas. I think for the most part they felt that what we had there was pretty good, although the development engineers did note that some of their clients were not going to be liking some of the things that we planned. And so we knew that up front, though. Now, one of the surprising things, though, was that our planning department was not on board with what we were proposing. They didn't support a lot of the things that we put in there. And then our urban development department, which primarily works in the downtown area and with the already built neighborhoods, they had a few issues with it, but they were a little more on board than the planning department. And then, as I said, the local developers were not really on board with this at all. Now, we did have some areas of agreement where people recognized the need for this. And one of the things before my arrival, the city of Lincoln had not had a city traffic engineer for a long time. And one of the reasons I got hired was because of the need to have a traffic engineer and to make sure that traffic started moving again in Lincoln. Again, it's been a growing town, but it has that small town mentality. So I didn't have a whole lot of trouble convincing people that there was a need for an access management policy because it would pay dividends not only immediately but also well into the future. Now, people did agree that a new policy was needed, and they realized that the old one was pretty much a joke, and that there had to be a better way to do things. And then one of the things that I found out quickly was that developers like to know up front what's going to be expected of them. Now, in the past, we'd been pretty hit or miss on whether or not we would require traffic impact studies for a project. Now, I don't think anybody likes to pay to have a traffic impact study, but at least if they know that's going to be a requirement, they can kind of put that into their numbers up front and know that that's coming. And so we found out that was a real plus in our policy. Another thing that they like to know is if I follow the rules, I'll get a yes. And that's an important one to keep in mind too, because again, to most of these developers, time is money. And so if they can get things through faster, it actually saves them money. And so they like to know what it is that's going to be required of them. And then that also allows them to decide, okay, if I want to buck the policy and go against it, it's going to take me more time. Is that, do the costs balance out? finally, the big thing that we came out of this was a clear deviation policy. And again, the developers like to know, if they don't like what I say, how do they try to get what they want? Now, at the time, they would first come to staff and talk to us and see if they could get us to back off something. Then they'd go to the department director, and then they'd go to the mayor, and then finally to the city council, who generally gave them the best hearing. And so, again, they just liked knowing the process, and through this, we were able to streamline it. Now, my theory of access management has always been, I want to make every situation better. Maybe not perfect, but it needs to be better. And so that's kind of where I've always started from. And with any redevelopment, that's what I'm looking for. I may not be able to hit the policy perfectly, but I want to make the situation better than what it was before. And one of the ways that we started on this project was looking at street classification. Now, there was a real a problem with some of our staff members who said, you're not using the federal street classification. Well, that's because the federal street classification didn't make sense in a lot of the built-out areas of the city. I knew we were never going to get the kind of access management that I wanted or that we would need for those. So actually, a lot of our categories are lower than what our national or our federal highway classification system would be, and that's actually worked out fairly well. Now, the planning department didn't think that we should have any access management on any collector or local streets, and for the most part, I might tend to agree with them. But there are instances where I believe it is important to have some access management on those other types of streets. So that was an area that we had to work on. Then throat links, that was kind of a funny one, because initially the planning department was opposed to any standards on throat links until they started to see how it worked. Lincoln, we have our share of strip malls along some of our major roadways, and of course, throat links don't really work with strip malls. But then when they started to see, maybe we can get rid of some of our strip malls if we start putting in some throat links, they got on board with this, and of course now all the buildings are pushed up to the street, and the parking lot and circulation is behind them. So that's worked out really well. Now, one of my novel ideas that I included in the early versions of this was that if you think about it, when you have a project on a street and you want to close a driveway, chances are you have to pay to close that driveway. So my idea was, all right, so let's say you get your one driveway that you're required under law, but if you want any additional driveways, you're going to pay us for them. I mean, I thought that seemed like a fair exchange, but boy, that one was dead on arrival. Another one that I tried along those lines was that we would charge a sliding fee scale for driveways depending on how much or how many trips were expected to be generated through that driveway. And my thought was, it's going to take us more effort to do the permits on driveways where we're having to review traffic studies and that sort of stuff. And so, again, I was just looking to pay off our city costs, but that one also went nowhere fast. Now, another thing that was interesting was that we found, I'm in the Public Works Department, and we found that a number of the other departments felt that they should have equal say in access management decisions. Well, that was kind of a non-starter with me. I just said no and left them behind. Although we did, in the end, allow the Building and Safety Department, they issue our residential building permits, and Public Works continues to do the commercial permits. And then kind of the final sticking point was, how would we handle deviations and requests for waivers and those sorts of things? And at the time, we had a strong mayor who liked to have his fingers in everything. And he was actually the one that was kind of pushing on this one, that he would appoint the committee that would decide whether or not access management decisions were upheld or not, which was fine by me, at least with that mayor, and who knows what happens with subsequent mayors. But in the end, we kind of backed off that, and final decision is now made by the city council. Now, as we went through subsequent rewrites of this, we begin to get a lot of comments, and a lot of people were coming more on board with us, and we were kind of getting things going in the right direction. And again, most people realized that this policy was going to be a good thing. But we still had some opposition to it, and a lot of it was coming from some highly influential sources. So we could see that we still had some work to do in order to make this happen. Now, it was about this time that somebody suggested we should have a committee come in and work on this together. And I was like, no way. That's the last thing I wanted to do, was write a policy by committee. And over time, they started convincing me. They showed me how another policy document that was done by the city, it was for stormwater management. They'd gone through this committee, and actually it ended up working out very well. They ended up with a policy that was adopted, and everybody was pretty much on board with. So finally I reluctantly gave in, and we created this access management study team. Now, the greatest thing that happened with this access management study team was we found the right guy to be the facilitator for it. And the guy that we found was currently our development services director, but in his previous role, he'd been the head of the Lincoln Home Builders Association. So he kind of had some instant credibility with the builders and the developers in town, and so they felt that he would do them right, and so they were willing to accept him. So we got the team formed, and then we started educating the members of that team. We needed to show them what it was we were trying to do with access management, and kind of get them going and understanding what we could actually achieve with access management. And I showed them policies from around the country, things that, again, I thought were state-of-the-art, and showed them that what we were proposing in Lincoln were not gold-plated standards. It wasn't anything other people weren't doing. And so that kind of got people thinking, okay, all right, maybe this is okay. And then once we had them sort of educated and up to speed, one of the things that we did was we checked with each of the members on that committee and asked them kind of what are your hot buttons? What about this don't you like? And once we found that out, we had each of them go and write a white paper on the subject that they were most concerned about. Now, on this committee, we had developers, we had home builders, we had engineers, we had development attorneys, we had a member from the state DOT. So we had a wide variety of folks, and they brought their white papers back, and we shared them with the group, and then we started discussing them. And the cool thing about this was that the people would see, maybe there's one or two that have a problem in this area, but a number of the other people in the group kind of see where, okay, but that is a good thing. And so through the group kind of moderating things, we were able to get to a good finishing point, if you will. And so by the time that we'd worked through all these white papers, we had some compromises to the document, but the best thing for me was that all of my crucial requirements, the things that I felt that I had to have out of this document, they were still there and intact. And in the end, we were able to get this group to come to a consensus. So we finally finalized the document and got everybody to sign off on it. And at that point, I took it out on the, as I call it, the rubber chicken circuit, which is going around to all the groups who serve you different forms of chicken for your lunch. The home builders, the realtors, Kiwanis clubs, whoever would listen to me, and got them kind of up to speed with what we're doing. And the cool part of that is, usually there'd be one or two of the members from our access study team that were there, and they'd kind of be nodding along as I was talking, and then when somebody would bring up a point, some disagreement with the policy, oftentimes it was that person from the team that was there arguing the point with them. So that ended up working out very well. Then one of the most interesting things, my chief opponent as we went into this process ended up being on this team. And I tell you what, I fought that with all that I could, but I ended up losing it. But in the end, it turned out to be really good because he got on board with this document while we were working through the process. And he actually made the presentation to our Planning Commission and our City Council in support of an access management policy. And needless to say, with him standing up front and saying this is a good thing, it passed both bodies unanimously. Now, the policy has been in place for about 6.5 years now, and it's worked out really well. Probably about 80% of the requests that we get, we approve. Of the ones that we don't approve, probably a very small percentage of those are taken to City Council, asking for a deviation request to be approved over our objection. And it's been very rare that the council would go against the policy. So it's worked out very well. So a few pieces of advice if you're thinking about going through a process. Consider the various conditions that you've got in your city and think about all the one-offs, as many of those as you can, and try to think how you will deal with those in your policy. Another thing, again, if you can get the people that are in opposition to you, if you can get them on board with you, it really does help make things a lot easier as you go. And again, it's going to take you some time if you want to go through these steps and really do it right. So I would encourage you to plan more time up front than what you think it's going to take. Another couple things is see what you can do to compromise with people and find ways to meet them in the middle. Now, one thing I would probably encourage you to do that I can't really take credit for, it just kind of turned out this way, is write your document a little stronger up front than you really care for it to be, because that gives you a place to kind of compromise back to. I was just a gung-ho, let's go get some access management when I started this, and it turned out good because by the end we ended up with a good document. But you don't want to write it so hard up front that nobody's going to work with you, but go ahead and feel free to put a few extra things in there that you can back off of. And then I guess the final thing I would say is that a lot of people have no clue what access management is. I mean, I had to explain to my wife why I was coming to this conference and what it was about. So it serves you well if you go ahead and explain what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and get people kind of thinking the same way you are up front. That helps out a lot. And with that, I would open it up for any questions. Yeah.
Your team, was it a mix between public and private? How many and how often do you guys meet?
Yeah, it was. The question was, was the team a mix of public and private, and how often did we meet? It was a mix of. It was primarily private. We had a few city staff members, but largely, as I said, it was like development engineers and traffic engineers. We had development attorneys, which is a big thing in Lincoln. We had a member from the DOT, and so yeah, a lot of them were just private citizens who came on board to help us out with this. And I think we were meeting about every other week or so, and this went on for the better part of a year.
Randy, I've got
Yeah.
Did you have like a formal appeal process? In the beginning of your presentation, you said if someone disagreed with you, they would go to the department head, the mayor, all the avenues that they could probably go at. Did you set up something formal that, okay, we got a disagreement here, okay, I want to appeal this, I can go to the next step?
Yeah, the question was, did we have a formal appeals process before?
Well,
Okay, before or after? Before we didn't. Again, most of it was a lot of bluffing on my part to say, hey, you need to do this and this, and if they didn't like that, then they would go on. But afterwards, yeah, we do have a formal appeal process that's written into the document. If they don't follow the policy, they write out a deviation request. They submit that to the Director of Public Works. We make our ruling on that. If they don't like what we say, then they can appeal it to the City Council, and so that's the way it works out right now. Phil?
Are you saying that your most frequent appeal or whatever is a design deviation, not administrative, like a denial of access, more frequently a design issue?
Yeah, it's usually the question was, is it usually a design, or is it an issue of whether or not we would grant access? We get a little of both, but probably the biggest one we get is like wanting to not meet the full right turn lane requirement or something like that. So most of them are design based, and yeah, we're pretty successful. I mean, we recognize there's a few things in the policy. I'm getting ready to rewrite it after this conference, after I see what's new and great, and so we're going to update it. And you know, there's a few things that we get regularly that we're constantly getting the same things about. So yeah, we'll make those changes. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm from South Africa, so maybe our standards and I've recently learned that we differ quite a lot. In South Africa, we use guidelines because that gives us the opportunity to negotiate with the consultants and make a decision on what we are willing to approve.
Okay.
Which is the reason we don't implement the policy, because in South Africa, policy is in fact a legal document which is promulgated via the politicians. So nobody could go back to them asking them for permission to deviate what we are willing to approve. And what I understand from you is that in America, you guys can go to the politicians and ask them to alter what you are willing to approve.
Yeah. So the question is,
why a policy and not a guideline?
Yeah, all right. Policy versus a guideline. For us, it's part of our Lincoln Municipal Code, so it is a part of the law. I guess we do have a little bit of flexibility to work with developers if you know we're looking at the whole totality of the situation, especially thinking about a larger development, and so between that we do have some flexibility, and then as well with the deviation requests. Sometimes we recognize that you know they're proposing something that does make sense. Even though it's not strictly with the policy, we will have them write up a deviation request, and then we can still approve that. But that way, it keeps the next guy from coming in and saying, "Well, you got that. I should get that over here." No. Here's the reasons. Here's why this one's different, and we're not doing it over here. So, yeah, it's a little bit of both.
So an engineer can't tell a private person what to do unless you're backed up, not by policy, legal policy, not engineering policy. So it's a matter of property rights can only be regulated if it's a public document adopted by the legislative body at the city or the state level. That's just the way it works.
That makes sense to me of why. For us, it's a decision to be made.
If we try to enforce something that's not in regulation, you either have a pissing match between two engineers or you lose. When you go into in front of the judge and you're doing this and the developer guy's pointing the other way, you're just not very successful unless it's actually written in the law and adopted by someone like a city council or a state.
Probably got time for one more question. Okay. All right.
All right.
Thank you, Randy.